Hey everyone, my name's Kaif, and with me I have my very good friend Surya.
Hey guys, we are starting a brand new YouTube channel, Everything Cyber, where we are excited on going about different topics, whether be it cybersecurity or some technical topics.
And on top of that, we will have tons of hands-on technical sessions where we explore new technologies, review the latest and greatest tools, and much, much more. The goal of this channel is to grow the thinking muscles and hands-on knowledge of both our listeners and ourselves.
Yeah, we're excited to have you on this journey, and let's jump on to this episode. We are recording now.
Awesome. Hello everyone. Welcome to today's episode of Everything Cyber. My name's Kaif, and with me I have today Surya.
Hey guys.
So, today is episode number
2.
And in this episode, we will talk about why phishing is so dangerous and still so prevalent. In the recent times, some of the biggest hacks have had phishing as their one of the main vectors of attack. So if you look at the Sony hack, the Colonial Pipeline, or even the could-be President Hillary's email campaign.
Yeah, that's an interesting point there. Other than that, also seen like in Verizon DBIR report recently that came about a few months back. Within the APAC region, the number one attack vector was social engineering, and 99% of the social engineering attacks are literally phishing.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure it's just not APAC. Other regions would have very similar statistics.
Yeah, it's just like it just showcases an instance of of it being in the spotlight. Like, hey, this is happening, and of course, phishing in general is more widespread than ever before.
Absolutely.
And I was thinking I'll just go a brief overview of like the history of email and like spoofing. Email basically.
Let's set up the scene.
Started off as like a method of communication between like universities that were initially using it, and then it later like got blown up to the internet, and security was never a consideration. When this protocol was being made, no one cared about security. SMTP, no one cared about security, and that pretty much leads us to today, where we have like lots of security issues that have been like patched with protocols, and like in the earlier days when spoofing initially started, basically it was pretty easy for us to identify it was a spoofing mail.
The Nigerian prince.
The Nigerian prince, yeah. The Nigerian prince used to have like a ton of spelling mistakes, grammatical errors, like random capitalization and text being bolded. So it's like very easy for us to identify, like, hey, like you knew it was phishing as soon as you looked at it. But, in today's world, I feel like over a period of time, the attackers have gotten better. The mails are more refined. Like they have good grammar, they're well structured, and they even sometimes contain signatures, like your company signature and stuff. And
Nigerian prince went to grammar school.
Yeah. And then, it's also become more targeted. You can see like targeted phishing campaigns happening against different people, and it's become more widespread and more common in today's world. You could say
it's been turned into this wildly effective way of attacking people, because as we know, and it's a very overly used word, but it is true that one of the weakest links in cybersecurity are the humans. And when the attackers have figured out how to exploit that aspect, then it has become super dangerous.
Absolutely agreed.
So yeah, moving on this conversation, I feel like what we should discuss today, why emails phishing is so dangerous, is we need to look at two aspects. The first aspect is the technical side, how even this in 2022, how are lots of dangerous and effective campaigns are landing in our mailbox. What are our defenses against it? And you talked about different protocols, and I'm pretty sure even if it didn't start with security in mind, there has been developments, right? And why are those developments effective or whatnot? And the second aspect I definitely feel is the human aspect, which is the social and psychological aspect. So this is how I feel like we should take our conversation on. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Like I think both of them combined have made it a super, super effective vector for attackers to utilize to gain access to systems and, then
Mm-hmm.
escalate their privileges and exploit information, basically. Uh, Coming to the technical side, as I said, like email at the start, like security was not a consideration. So you had a good amount of security deficiencies that came from the protocol.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, what happened is that we started patching it. You start putting fixes, and these came through like these three protocols that came over a period of 20 years, you could say, like slowly started coming. The
And what are
first,
those protocols?
yeah, the first one we had is SPF. Basically, what this does is that it allows you to say, hey, this sender, is he allowed to send for my domain? Yes or no? Basically just clarifying that. And then via that, like, so when a receiver receives the mail, he can then verify, hey, is this person allowed to send on behalf of your domain? Yes. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
I'll allow him or
I see.
go
So
through
you're
its
talking
filter.
about SPF,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's on that. Then afterwards, we are like, people wanted to protect against attacks that happen while you're in transit, while your mail is in transit. Sorry. So we had DKIM come along the way,
Mm-hmm.
which is on like domain keys. So basically, you attach a signature to your mail, and it gets sent over to the receiver side. The receiver then verifies the mail, with the signature, and then he's like, okay, cool. It's not been, compromised as
Yeah.
during transit. So it's basically
Nothing has
providing
changed in
integrity.
between.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's basically providing integrity. That's the goal of it.
Okay,
And
okay. So far we had SPF, which makes sure that the email being received is coming from a genuine source.
yep.
The second one we have DKIM, which makes sure that email, while it being in transit, it hasn't been changed, right?
Yep.
So
It's not
those are
been
the two
tampered
ones, yeah.
with. Yeah.
Tampered with. Okay, gotcha.
And the last one we have is like DMARC.
Mm-hmm.
DMARC is something that sits on top of SPF and DKIM. There's some technical parts to it, which I won't go into in this episode, but basically you can think about it as covering up some of the deficiencies that are there from SPF and DKIM, while also providing you some reporting content.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a note for our audience that these protocols are definitely quite interesting, but also quite complex from a technology implementation perspective. So if you want to know more about SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, we highly recommend looking those up because already lots of good resources exist. Today's focus would be more on the misconfiguration side of things and how these protocols have shortcomings, and then they get leveraged by the attackers to
Yep.
do spoofing and phishing campaigns.
Yeah, I think you hit a proper point. Is that configuration, right? So where
Hmm.
do we configure these protocols? So all of these three protocols are basically like a DNS record that you configure for your own domain, right? So
Mm.
these
So
these
it's from the sender side. The sender is
yeah, the
configuring
sender,
it.
like, the sender is basically like, hey, if it's like our domain, we're like everythingcyber.com. It's like, okay, cool, this domain is like, you configure the SPF, DKIM, and DMARC records for that, basically. So it's like for protecting your domain, right? So it's like, so if you're getting mail from like 123 at gmail.com, or like at gmail.co.uk dot some random, like phishing mail, right? You can't protect against that with these protocols. All right. These
Okay.
protocols are specifically set for your own domain, right?
So it's the organizations. Let's
Yeah.
say we are an organization and we want to be sending marketing emails promoting our new episodes, this one which we're recording. And if we don't set up our SPF properly, then it would be called as spam, or it would be
Yeah.
sorted as spam by
Yeah.
Gmail, Outlook, or whatever the mailbox is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a pretty common thing I've seen over my time.
Example, yeah.
Yeah, like, you have like MailChimp and stuff that uses your domain to send marketing mails to various clients, right? And if you have a misconfiguration within your SPF, basically it can get classified as spam.
Mm-hmm.
It'll like fail, and then it's like, hey, like all my marketing mails just going in their junk. One of the reasons it is one of the reasons. There are other factors to that effect on that. The other thing that I've seen is like pretty common is like if you have like internal mails that are flowing through like for your CRM system, your HR systems, and so on, and they're using like cloud service providers, and if they are misconfigured, then all of those important company mails are going into your junk, right? So like basically the receivers are, or the users of these services are losing their confidence on these mails, right? If you go into the junk, you're like, hey, why is this going to my junk? Should I actually click on this or not? It's like, it again ties back into the psychological aspect of things. So what you're getting into basically is like configuration is something that needs to be both kept up to date and done properly. So that takes effort.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's one
And
of the
on top
ones,
of that, I feel like one thing I should add, that these protocols, which are fairly old, they actually have some built-in shortcomings of themselves. For example, SPF. There's the DNS lookup limit issue,
Yep.
which will sort of not go into too deep, but the whole shenanigan with that is, so when your mailbox or mail server is checking up for that SPF records, there is a limit at a time on how many DNS records it can look up to, which is set to 10.
Yep.
And if it's more than that, then your mail will just be, in this case, correct me if I'm wrong, it will be just not processed with that.
It'll get a thing called as, sorry, I'm getting a bit technical, but it'll get a thing called a sperm error. And basically what that does is that it's basically an SPF fail. It's like, hey, this failed. And the other thing that I've seen common, it's a built-in deficiency, you could say, but it's kind of fixed too, is the address difference on the froms. So they're like two froms within an email, and they can have a difference. There's a slight difference. I don't want to get too technical, but that is another part.
In layman's terms, so when you receive an email, there is the name of the sender and there's also the return address. And a lot of the time, the attackers can change the name of the sender, right? And so when we humans look at it, let's say in this case the email says is from Hulu, but if you look at the return address, it's completely something random.
Yeah.
Right. So a lot of the times when you're in a rush, we fail to look at this parity. But we do have these issues fixed by DMARC, right?
You could say to a certain extent, yes. Okay. I would say it covers most of the point and gives confidence to the receiver that this mail is legitimate. The issue with DMARC that I've seen sometimes is that it's sometimes hard to implement because you need to have your SPF and DKIM set before you implement DMARC. You need at least one, but it's recommended that you have both SPF and DKIM set up before you do your DMARC, because that is sitting on top of those two. And then the other thing that I've noticed is that people need to fine-tune DMARC a bit. It requires a bit of work and thought process on it, right? So a lot of times there's this configuration where you basically have this policy configuration where you can set, if it fails DMARC, then you do this, right? A lot of times it's set to none. Which is very odd, you go all the way to set up DMARC. You're like, yeah, I'll do all of that, but I will not do anything with the result.
What does none mean in this case?
None means like even if it fails DMARC, like the alignment, that's what we call it. No action is taken, right? It won't be quarantined. It won't be rejected. It will
still come. So
it'll still come. Yeah.
If it fails the authentication check, it still comes to their mailbox, right? So what it seems like these protocols, they firstly are hard to configure properly. That seems to be the case. And also you mentioned there's the issue of fine tuning and maintenance. So overall, my understanding is we have these guardrails against phishing and spoofing, but these guardrails are firstly hard to implement, and secondly it needs maintenance, and it has some of these have built-in issues as well, which makes this whole thing a bit complicated.
I'll just add 2 points to this that just came up in my mind. I think one of them is that, as I said before, this is like specifically for your domain, right? Like your record, it's like basically gives the receiver some confidence on your domain, right? That's the first point. And like if it's misconfigured, a recent report that came out is that Queensland Gov had one of their SPF records misconfigured. It basically allowed any EC2 instance, like if anyone set up an EC2 instance and set up a mail from that with like a particular IP range, then it would pass SPF and it would pass those filters, So you could basically be getting phishing mails from your internal mail, which looks legitimate, right? Which is very scary.
Yeah,
because that's one
that
of
is
the
gonna be
most
super
common
scary.
ways people identify whether the mail is phishing or not, right? And you could just fall like straight up victim to that. The other thing I see is that other than these, the second part that is there within your mail usually is like you have these two parts. One is like traffic flow, like how the traffic will flow, like the email flow. Like, okay, if it comes from this sender, just block straight up. You can set those up. And you have like these spam filters, right? So the most of the big firms like Gmail, Outlook, they all like pre-process and they have like some scoring with their spam filters, and you can set your filter to whatever rating you want, and that will like based on certain calculations will automatically filter the mail. Like, okay, it'll go into his inbox, okay, this mail will go to his junk, or this mail will not be received, so they can set that up too within their own mail. So those are like the two areas. So you have the protocols that help you protect for your own domain's mails.
So just to cut you off there, so yeah, I've got a question.
Yeah.
So these protocols, you did talk about that they need to be configured by the domain or the organization, right?
Yeah.
So that means, let's say I'm a small or medium business, and if I get some mail provider, whether it's Google for Business, OneDrive doesn't make a difference, right? So it's not pre-configured with my mailbox. I need to go in specifically and configure these protocols, configure SPF, configure DKIM and DMARC on top of just getting the mailbox right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
it is absolutely necessary that you do it. It's not too difficult. There's documentation available on doing SPF, but surely going to the next step where you do DKIM and DMARC, that needs a bit more research and fine tuning in most cases, and people usually struggle with that. Like so that's the issue in that sense.
Yeah, I've made an attempt and it was significantly complicated. Not gonna lie, because I've seen this remark that DMARC is easy. It is easy to set up the initial DNS records, but fine tuning and the other maintenance part, it is difficult. It's just a rabbit hole. The point I was trying to make is when we have small to medium scale businesses who already have constraint on their IT resources, having to set these up is also another sort of pain point. It's like a high traction kind of commitment that these companies need to allocate, right? That's why I see a lot of these businesses falling victim to phishing scams, like other people having the ability to spoof their emails and send emails on their behalf, as well as their mailboxes having lots of issues.
There's some cases where there's a configuration within SPF where instead of block mails, like there's failing mails, so you have like soft fail and hard fail. People just say put this plus sign instead of the minus/tilde icon, and that basically is like anyone can send mails on my behalf.
A big no-no.
Yeah, and I think there are a good number of Australian organizations that do have the plus, and I've seen in certain cases where an MSP had this plus in their DNS record and all of their customers were also affected by it. So
what that effectively means is that because of that misconfiguration, all of those companies, the attacker can send email on their behalf.
Yeah, exactly. So he'll be like, I am admin at xyz.com. Yeah, xyz.com. And then I send a mail as if it's internal, like there's nothing like differentiating
and
that mail from your
hard
regular
to,
mail.
As someone who has, I haven't been to an actual phishing victim, but I've been victim of the more corporate simulation. So I'll get to that in a bit. But as as a user, when I see an email coming from a trusted source,
Yep.
I have no idea it was spoofed, right? So I would just place my trust because everything looks in order, and
Yep.
I would just go ahead with clicking on that link or giving that information that email is asking for. So
Absolutely
yeah,
agreed.
it's suddenly quite scary to hear that. Yeah,
Yeah, it's just again misconfiguration. Yeah,
yeah.
coming you hit a point, trust, right? Like coming to that side, if you look at it, it's coming more towards the psychological side of things. You're
Mhm.
placing trust on a mail, right? Are there any other psychological points that you have, Kaif, in regards to phishing itself?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think from my short to medium experience, what I have seen is when we craft emails for simulations or when I see this for the phishing emails in different places,
Mm-hmm.
there are usually three elements to it. There's always the urgency that, hey, this needs to be done within X amount of time.
Yeah.
There is the familiarity that the attackers often mimic the internal HR or look up some employee like these days LinkedIn and everything with LinkedIn and everything, there's lots of sources where the third party can get information about the company.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so when we see something familiar, the internal tone matches, we are more susceptible to accepting it.
Yeah.
And the other one was authority. Let's say the email is pretending to be the director or the CEO, and it also has the urgency factor that send X amount of money to this account now because the bill is due. Oftentimes, people just fall for it, right? And it's hard to train against that if you just tell people that, okay, don't phishing exists, don't click on the link, double check, blah blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the research shows that those kind of training is quite ineffective if you don't have that situational awareness
Yep.
on how to behave in certain cases. And for example, I'll give an example, and this was a study done by this company called F-Secure, and they had a massive sample size of, I think,
80,000. Yeah,
82,000
around 80,000 plus.
people.
Yeah.
That was like huge. And just a side note is all those people are from different corporate companies, so it was done particularly on corporate phishing. And the type of email that was most popular was the that had those three elements embedded into it: authority, familiarity, and some
Uh,
sort of urgency.
yeah.
The familiarity is a huge because even if we train nowadays, even if we have trained ourselves against double checking against, oh, we don't need to rush, or even if it's from a higher up, if there's a tone of familiarity, we put a lot of trust.
Yeah.
And I can firsthand relate to that because this is again a funny story. Like my lesson learned, which was back in Atlassian, we were doing some phishing simulation, and it was done by the awareness team, so I was not part of it, and I also received that email, right? And
Yeah.
that email was something like, "Oh, your new company shares have been allocated," and it had all the correct tones and everything, right? And also the logo. There was some typo squatting, but because I was expecting some of those things, some email like that, as well as everything else was so familiar. I
Yeah.
was like, okay, I'm just gonna click on it. Let's see what new shares I got, baby. Let's go. But but yeah, it turned out to be the redirection to our phishing awareness page,
Yeah.
and um, I am very tempted to say that's another aspect that that was my name written in the Hall of Shame, but I actually won't say that because that's the other aspect, right? The cultural
Stigma. Yeah.
is yeah, cultural stigma that when we fall victim of some kind of campaign like this, it's actually the quicker we let the IT team or the security team know, the easier it is to contain it. But we have this, shame and wall of shame kind of culture. It is effective in certain cases, but I'm not a big advocate of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that I feel like culture-wise, we still have some improvements to do, and that adds on to this whole issue.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree with that. Like having a wall of shame itself. Sometimes I've noticed, like in mainly like dev side, if you look at it,
Hmm.
sometimes the QA will just not tell like the issues that are there within the app
Mm.
because there's like pressure from the org to get the app out as like the application or development out as soon as possible.
Possible,
And
yeah.
you know that like this guy knows there's like security vulnerabilities existing right within this application, but he's like, I need to get this out because my org needs it out, so I'll just like
Yeah.
shut up, right? And if
Gotta
you
gotta hit those sprint goals.
yeah. So if you like open up the org, you're like, okay, I want to accept failures. I want to accept mistakes that can happen from
Mm.
both users, you know, and an organizational standpoint. Then you will be able to make mistakes, learn from that, and improve your process and improve your people. Right? We all make mistakes. It's just natural. It's a
Yeah,
human
to err is
nature.
human,
Yeah.
right?
So that
Um,
allows the whole security process to grow. That allows the whole security culture to grow. So I think that is like very key in like developing a good security culture within an organization.
yeah, absolutely. And for so many companies, I only see that the phishing training,
Mm-hmm.
it's like a compliance requirement. It's just a one-pager document on or a few sort of uh, documents or visuals.
Yeah.
That's not, in my opinion, effective training, and that does not make you situationally aware. That's where I feel the training side of things is really lacking. If there was proper simulation-based training and more of those more of those things in the same tangent, I feel like the psychological side can be suppressed much more.
Yep.
Another aspect, I think I was reading another article that the reporting process needs to be very, very easy when you come across phishing.
Yes.
And a lot of the times, when you receive a phishing email and stuff, you need to fetch up the email for security, find that it's in an obscure document, and
Yeah.
the whole process is very complicated,
True.
right? And that just discourages people from reporting it.
I yeah, I
Um,
just have a point to make on that. You know, like in I think a good portion of organization or most organizations use Office 365 or Outlook in
mm,
some way, shape, or form, right? So in that, it's very easy to configure the reporting aspects, just like a tick box, and then you just
mm.
enable that, and anyone can like right click on a mail and then say report this as phish or spoof. You
Exactly.
know,
There's
yeah,
lots of free services and add-ons as well, just
yeah,
outside of that Outlook and Office 360 environment.
yeah,
Just a regular point
yeah.
for
I
listeners.
think
So,
the other point is that, you know, even if it exists and even if it's made easy, if people do not know about it, they'll never use it, right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
I think the other point that I would just add to that is like similar to training, the training should also include on how you could report the mail and how you could reach out to people if you're like unsure if it's a phishing mail or a legitimate mail. I
Mhm.
think that's a key part too.
Absolutely. Yeah, cool. I think that covers it well, Sue. Yeah, so we talked about why phishing is so dangerous, and sort of the summary of the talk was, first, there's the technical side of things
Yep.
where um, actual legitimate domains are spoofed, and the spoofing happens because from technical perspective, the protocols we have are very easy to misconfigure, and they're also hard to maintain and manage, so which poses as a challenge. And moving forward, when the email actually lands in our mailbox, socially we have a lack of proper training.
Yep.
We have a lack of situational awareness and
Mm-hmm.
that response capability, that resilience,
Yep.
that leads on to that phishing becoming so effective. And we have covered the cultural side as well.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think a combination of factors, you know, like
Yeah.
like the filters that are in place at the start, like you know, you have your spam filters and stuff, and you have this like domain verification via the SPF DKIM mark. So these are like your initial filters to block out a certain portion of the phishing
Mhm.
mails slash spam mails that are coming into your organization. And then like once it like some can pass through, some always will pass through. Once it passes through and gets to a user, then it's on the user's training and his awareness about
Mhm.
this mail. It's like, something is not right about this mail. Why am I getting a free phone from my
Yeah.
org? You know, no one informed me about this. You know, so it's like them basically being aware that something looks a bit out of the ordinary. You know, and as you said, like sometimes they have this urgency, like, oh, please reply to us ASAP, or please reply to us within 1 day so you can be added to the list and stuff like that, right? So to get the user to click the link. So him being
Yeah.
aware, like, hey, this is a bit out of the ordinary. I'm not expecting this, or him or her, and basically that opens up to the user side. So like the user will make the decision on whether they click the link or they do not, or they report it. So I think both sides combined make it an effective protection against phishing / spoofing mails that you get.
So on the basis of that, Surya, looking forward, what do you think the landscape will look like going forward? What are some of the trends or sort of the outcomes we might see?
I think it's easy to say that phishing or spoofing is not going to die anytime soon.
Yeah.
As long as like mail exists, it'll still be prevalent in some way, shape, or form, because there can be misconfigurations within the technical side. People
Always.
can always click links even if they're not meant to. Like, it's like the most blatant phishing or spam mail, but people will still click it, So you can't prevent that. So it'll always exist in some way, shape, or form. I think they're coming to the protocol side of things, like, other than DKIM, DMARC, and SPF, other protocols have come beyond that. Some of them are like DANE, MTA, STS, to close other loopholes that are there within the SFTP/email protocols. And so as long as there are some loopholes that are discovered, new protocols may arise to close those loopholes. It's just that how many firms will actually implement it. Like MTA, STS is like probably like 4 or 5 mailboxes that I know of. Like, like the popular ones like Gmail and Outlook, they have it implemented, but not like most of the companies. They don't even know it exists, right? And the other thing I would say is that maybe it's time to like move away from mail completely.
I agree.
Yeah.
I 100% agree on that.
Like, like communication, like in organizations, back in the olden days, we used to use like Skype for business and stuff, you always use for messaging. And then now it's like fully blown out to like Slack and Teams, where you have it just not as a communication channel, but also you have like tons of integrations that are available within it.
Absolutely.
So it's used in a more wider scale, you could say.
And just to add on that these platforms, these newer products, unlike email, security was a forethought, right?
Yep.
When these products were being built, someone actually thought a lot about, okay, how do we make sure these platforms are more secure? So comparatively, I feel these platforms are much more resilient.
Absolutely.
So that's definitely one of the plus points of these as well. And unlike email, these platforms also have a dedicated team always working in the background to make these more and more secure.
Agreed.
So definitely more and more reasons to move to Slack and Teams. It's more cooler. It's better as well.
Yeah. I think you also have the part where you can invite external parties to your Slack channels or Teams channels. So it is going there to a certain extent, but I don't think it can completely replace email as it is at this point. You can't just like randomly message someone, you need to like invite them and go through that whole process. Whereas in email, you could just send it, there's no like friction.
And if you think of how much of
yeah.
our digital identity is tied to email,
yes,
right? If someone has access to my email, they have access to my entire life, right? So
yeah, I completely
it's gonna be super
agree.
hard to replace that.
I completely agree. If I think back, when I first created my Outlook account, it was specifically for my email. And then that email account was then tied up to different services,
Everything.
right?
Yeah.
But now if I go and type my Outlook account, it's no longer an Outlook account according to Microsoft. It's a Microsoft account, right? So you have it as a Microsoft account, which is just an account, okay? And then you have services below that.
Services, yeah.
So it's
like these days, I don't even log in with email
yeah.
and password. Like I always sign in with Google, sign in with this or that.
Yeah.
So yeah, the more and more things are being
it's getting disattached. It's no longer you log in via your email. It's still there. It's still very popular. But I'm saying it's moving more towards like, okay, I log in via my account, right? An email account was just a way, and now it's moving more towards like it's just an account. There's no email with it. So that's some of the interesting stuff, like people moving away, like things changing over a period of time, which is actually pretty good. Yeah.
Nice.
And then I can't think much from a psychological standpoint, like training standpoint. I have a few points I had, like some kind of training, for sure, as you mentioned, and building that awareness within users. But I was thinking there's probably like few other contexts that you can add, Kev, like on those points in regards to
I
training.
100% agree with you on the technical thoughts, technical um, updates that might or improvements that might have along the ways.
Yeah.
From a social psychological standpoint, I feel like sooner or later we are going to realize that the phishing training we have as just a compliance requirement is just a waste of money,
Yeah.
and we need to add more engaging form of training. And I'm just waiting to see more and more of that adoption going on on that. For example, in Atlassian, we had this amazing security awareness training that happens each year, but instead of, you just going through some documents or videos, it was pretty much like an interactive game, which I
Nice.
enjoyed much more. And I think even as if a non-security person would enjoy that much more.
Yep.
So it's not just a random game. It was like you are an spy, an operative at an organization, and you need to do a bunch of stuff, and it gives you the entire context of
Yep.
a national an ATP, APT, sorry. I'll need to edit that part out.
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail right. I think that I can't remember where this research was, or I'm just plucking this info out of my head. But I do remember that a lot of the training, if it's not engaging, people forget it a day
Yeah.
after the training. Like even though you literally did the security awareness training like just a week ago, you just forgot it. You literally are like, I don't care about it, right? But if you make it more engaging, then people for sure will
Mm,
remember that for a longer period of time, which is what you
absolutely.
want, right? So an effective training is for sure ideal.
Mm, agreed. Well, with that, so yeah, we will wrap up today's episode here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for all your cool insights. I definitely learned a lot.
Yeah, you too, man.
Awesome. And thank you so much for all of our audience. We really appreciate you sharing with your time with us and listening to our episode. And if you have more thoughts, feel free to reach out to us via the comments, or I'll just pop in our LinkedIn details as well. Feel free to reach out anytime. And thanks again for listening. Take
Thanks,
care.
guys. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks,
Thanks, guys.
guys.
We really appreciate you listening to us and hope you enjoyed that.
Yeah, feel free to follow us on LinkedIn and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to also like and share our videos, and see you guys the next episode.